Hey there friends, welcome back to the channel. My name's Alex Lokes and I have another camera review for you today. If you've been following along with my own photography, I've gained a bit of a soft spot for entry-level SLRs. And that trend is definitely continuing. I have done the Maxim 70, the Canon EOS 3000, and now I finally have a Nikon, the Nikon F65. So let's go back to the studio, give you a background of this beautiful camera, a tour of it, and the brief functionality. And I'll see you back here. Nikon's history with the entry-level market is an interesting one, to say the least. Their first attempt, the Nikkor X line, ended with failure. And as popular as the Nikkor cameras were, they were heavy mechanical beasts. So in 1979, they released their first true entry-level SLR that we can actually trace the history of the F65 to, and that would be the EM. Now what set the EM apart from other entry-level cameras is that it was built to the same level of quality as other Nikon cameras. It featured aperture priority, it used the Nikon F mount and could use any AI or AIS lens out there. And it also had a 1/90th of a second mechanical backup and bulb mode. The problem is that they marketed it only towards women, saying that women needed a simple camera. I think you can see the problem with that. So in 1982, with the EM still selling, they released the FG. And the FG, for what it was actually a really good camera because it had program mode. That's right, the FG was the first Nikon camera to have full auto exposure. You also had access to aperture priority and metered manual. But the FG didn't sell well either, and both the EM and the FG ceased sales in 1984. So Nikon needed a replacement, and that would come in the form of the F301 in 1985. The trouble was in 1985, Minolta released the Maxim line, and the F301 remained a manual camera. But it was the first camera to feature full auto exposure, shutter priority, aperture priority, and metered manual, had a polycarbonate boxy body, and an internal motorized film advance. Not bad. It was followed up quickly by the F401 that actually used autofocus. And as time progressed, cameras got sleeker, designs changed, and that resulted in 1994's F50. The F50 also did completely away with any sort of dials and replaced everything with a button interface. That proved controversial and not very popular. So in 1998, the F60 hit the market, and the F60 was actually a really good camera. And a few minor updates later, we ended up with the F65, which is, to me, a very familiar camera. So why not take a closer look at the F65? And here it is. This is the Nikon F65. If you're used to cameras of this era, so the F100 and the F80 I count in this time frame, then this camera is going to look actually really familiar to you. You have that smoother pentaprism, the chunky grip, and that familiar red highlight right on the inner. The front of the camera is fairly simple. You have your lens release, your autofocus, manual focus trigger, your nameplate, your IR receiving sensor for remote operation, and a depth of field preview. Also on the side, you have your manual override for the focus assist light and your focus point selector, and this will engage the flash. Up on the top is where most of your controls are. You have your shutter release, which is very digital in its appearance. You have an on-off switch and your big LED display. On the side, you have your bracketing, and when you're in manual mode, this is what you press to adjust the aperture. On this side, you have your self-timer, you have your bracket, and you press these two together for a mid-roll rewind. Your center control dial, you have program mode, shutter priority, aperture priority, and manual. green auto, where the camera just does everything for you, and then your different creative modes here. On the back, you have a diopter adjustment, which is just an absolutely fabulous thing for them to include, especially for those who wear glasses. And you have your single command dial. On the side, there's your film back release. And you know what? For a camera as nice as this, it actually has a lot of really good features to it. So why not take a closer look at how to use the camera? So if you're familiar with Nikons of this age, then functionality will be fairly straightforward. One thing I really like is that the on-off switch is separate. So from off to on, you have your shutter speed and aperture displayed, along with the film counter and your battery life. Mounting and dismounting lens, super easy. Press and hold, rotate, twist. It takes a standard F mount, so you are good to go. You can also do manual focus, but I don't really like this camera in manual focus. It's a bit difficult. So, functionality. In green auto mode, the camera will actually set everything for you. It will automatically pop the flash if it feels it's needed, and just sets everything for you. There is absolutely no manually overriding it. In program mode, this is probably a good place to start with this camera, because then you can manually set the, you can manually select to use the flash or not, and the camera will still pick your aperture and shutter for you. Shutter priority mode, you pick the shutter, and that is adjusted with the command dial on the back. Same thing with the aperture priority mode, where now you're setting the aperture. It's very important that when you are using this camera to make sure that your lens is set to the smallest aperture, so in this case the f/22, and lock it down so that the camera can actually control that. The real trouble I find is when you get into manual mode. And you would think it's a Nikon. When you adjust the command dial, you will change the aperture, and then you have to toggle a button to change the shutter. No, it does the Canon thing, and your command dial by default will take care of the shutter speeds, and then you have to press and hold this button here, and then you can actually adjust your aperture. It's a bit awkward, as you can see. So I personally find that it's easiest to do in program, shutter, or aperture priority mode. Loading the film, quite simple. Open up the back, your film canister goes here, draw on your tab across in here, make sure it's fairly flat, and then as soon as you close it and do that first shutter press, it will automatically advance the film to frame 1. And then to rewind, it will automatically do that at the end of the roll, or you can do a mid-speed by pressing your EV adjustment and your bracket adjustment at the same time, and that will manually rewind it. So that's enough of me talking and showing off the camera. Let's get it out into the field. All right, so I am in beautiful Oakville, Ontario, outside the downtown, a little bit of a built-up residential area. And I have my Nikon F65 with the 28mm f2.8, a yellow filter, and behind it Ilford Delta 100, which I will be developing in Adox Rodinal 1-50. So without further ado, let's get walking. Coming from using a lot of autofocus Nikons, the F65 is almost instantly familiar. And I say almost for a couple of reasons. First, loading the batteries were opposite from what I expected, with the positive sides pointing towards the bottom of the camera. Thankfully, by my loading them backwards, it didn't damage the camera. The film door latch, well, it's nice and sturdy and doesn't seem to want to break, and loading film is automatic. The one downside is that you must use a DX-coated film canister, and there's no manual override. Of course, you do have that EV adjustment, which gives you ±2 stops, but as soon as you get that non-DX loaded canister in there, it defaults to ASA 100. Once going, the camera is automatic, good viewfinder with decent information displayed, and the autofocus is fast and accurate, so's the metering. Personally, I work with this camera in full program mode and focus on composing the image. It also works well in aperture or shutter priority mode, as you only have that single command dial. But once you go manual, things feel a little bit too Canon. The single command dial will adjust the shutter speed by default, and there's a button you need to push to adjust the aperture. The problem is, between the F60 and the F65, that button's been moved and it's now rather awkward to press, no matter how you hold the camera. The one thing I do find is that the camera does have a bit of a hair trigger. I think I'm about to go in for that half push, but it trips the shutter, but at least it's in focus and exposed right. Mid-roll rewind is through a 2-button push for safety, and the film rewinds all the way into the canister. Sadly, there's no overriding it. Overall, this is a really fun camera to work with, and despite using pro cameras, this is a nice breath of fresh air when I just want something simple. But the real power of the Nikon F is the fact that it has the F mount. So let's head back to the studio and I can discuss some of the excellent lenses that you can use with this entry-level camera. So you're probably thinking at this point, the F65, great way to get into film photography, and I got a ton of Nikon lenses at home, so I'm good to go. So the first thing you need to realize is that as an entry-level camera, the F65 is a bit limited when it comes to your F-mount lenses. First and foremost, you do not mount any pre-AI or non-AI auto Nikkor lenses on it. You will damage the lens and you will damage the lens mount on the camera. And getting the F65 repaired is pointless. Secondly, while you can mount your manual focus AI and AIS lenses on the camera, they actually won't work. You won't be able to use any of the metering on the F65 with your manual focus lenses, so don't even bother. If you're using a crop sensor Nikon, like you don't really want to use your DX glass on it, usually at the widest end they will have severe vignetting and fall off, so don't even bother. You want full frame AFD or AFG lenses, and the nice thing is that the F65 does support the AFS types. So you are a bit limited in the range of glass you can use with the camera, but don't let that stop you because there are plenty of good optics that can be had for fairly inexpensive on the used market, and even new if you can find them. So the first lens is one that I actually don't have anymore, but it is one that I bought for my F80, and that would be the 28 to 80 millimeter AF Type G. This is your kit lens. It's absolutely fantastic. It's not perfect. It gives you a decent range from that wide angle at 28 to a portrait length at 80. Quality, not exactly the best, but if it's all you have access to, fantastic. And they can be had cheap on the used market. You might even be able to find some new in box still. And it was actually the kit lens that came with the F65, so you can get it in both a black finish and a champagne finish. So you can buy a lens that matches whatever finish of F65 you own. If you want something a little more advanced in the zoom lens range, I highly recommend the 28 to 105 f3.5 to 4.5D. This is an older lens, but you know what? It works really well. It gives you a much longer zoom, especially with that 105 at that far end. It's a Type D lens, so there's an aperture ring on it, so you can use it with older Nikon cameras as well. And optically, it gives a really good job, and it's actually one that I use on the F65, I use it on my F5, and I even use it on my D750. In fact, most of my videos were filmed with the 28 to 105. It's just nice and versatile. If you're like me, you like a good prime lens. So the nice thing is that most prime lenses are the Type D. Those carry a bit more cost on the used market, but there's the original AF Nikkor lenses, and they can be had for a decent price. The two that catch my eye are the 24mm f2.8 and the 28mm f2.8. And the 28mm is an excellent choice for the f65. It works flawlessly with it. Bit slow on the autofocus, but you know what? It actually does a really good job. And bit of distortion, but nothing that can't be fixed in post-production. Another solid choice would be the 35mm f2, and I have that in the type D. And again, it's a nice, normal view. It's not too wide, it's not too long, has beautiful rendering, very little in the way of distortion, and is just a great catch-all carry-around lens. Doesn't add much to the camera weight or throw off its balance. Finally, there is of course the Nikon Nifty 50, and that would be the 50mm f1.8D. These you can still buy new in box or get on the used market. They're fairly inexpensive, as most people will spring for the f1.4D 50mm. And again, the 51.8D is one that I've since passed along to another photographer, but I used it for many years on a lot of my digital cameras and my f80. It does an absolutely fabulous job, nice fast 50 for indoor and low light work, and gives you that normal viewfinder. So that's about it for the optics. Again, stick to those autofocus lenses. They work best with the f65, avoid the DX, and try to match the lens for the camera body itself. You don't want to put too big of a lens on it, even if it will mount. It just will throw off the whole small form factor. And there we have it, the Nikon F65. I like this camera a lot more than I was expecting, and it provides an excellent foil to my Nikon F5. Sometimes I just don't want to carry the big heavy camera and I want a whole lot of automation, and that's where the F65 comes into play. And having a lot of Nikkor AF glass around, it only makes sense that I added this beauty to my collection. Of course, it's not perfect. The batteries, it takes a pair of CR2s, which can be a bit pricey and you do need a hardware store for. You can get an MB17 grip that allows you to run the camera on 4 AA batteries, giving it a bit more life and a bit more versatility, especially if you like to travel outside major urban centers and just want to be able to pick up batteries at your average gas station or convenience store. The best part is these cameras are affordable. You can pick one up on eBay without a lens for under $100. Most go for about $50 Canadian. You give it another 50 and good chance you're going to get a lens with it also. That covers it for today's review. Let me know in the comments below, what Nikkor system is your favorite? Do you prefer the modern autofocus, or are you more of a manual focus person? If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification icon so you know when I release new videos. Give me a thumbs up. And until next time, my name's Alex Oakes. Get out there, stay safe. Consumer grade doesn't always mean crap.